Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer here with Dylan Tovitz. Dylan, we talked all about Vanderbilt's loss to Alabama last week, but a new opportunity for this Vanderbilt team and kind of writing it in this morning's column where I feel like this is really when the going gets tough for this Vanderbilt team. You've got 6 games left, at least 3 of them against ranked teams, and they'll be home for a lot of the second half, but also, this is the time of year where bodies break down, where I think the national media buzz maybe goes away a little bit, and you're still going to hear about Vanderbilt nationally. But I mean, this is the time where, Dylan, I think you start to realize what this team actually is, and this is where the difference between a college football playoff team and an 8-4 or 7-5 team is really made. The nagging injuries are going to start to pile up a little bit. You're going to have to win games without being at your best. I mean, Dylan, this is the stretch run here when everybody's seemingly exhausted. A good time for Vanderbilt to come off the bye, but really the grind time of the season, Dylan.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wrote about this a little bit yesterday in the poll article, how their first bye really did come at an opportune time. I think starting this week really shifts focus to the second half of the season. It's a tough schedule remaining. All SEC teams, a lot of them at home. It's crazy they're gonna have their first SEC home game this week, and we're already 7 or 8 weeks into the
Mhm.
season. So that's kind of crazy. But yeah, I mean, and to your point, Joey, this is really where we're gonna find out where this team's going to go. I think they've done everything they've needed to do so far um, to keep their goals, out in front of them and within reach. And if you had said back in, June that Vanderbilt football would be 5-1 entering, the home stretch of their schedule where they take on LSU, a game in which they're favored, by the way, which I'm sure we're going to get into in a few minutes. But they're in a pretty good spot. But to your point, they need to go out there and they need to win some football games if they really want a chance to, you know, really put themselves in that conversation for the playoff. And I think that's, an okay thing to say now. I think in the beginning of the season, we were like, oh, well, if they want to achieve their goals, and we're still saying that. But I think it's okay. This team has earned the right to, have the college football playoff mentioned at least when we're talking about what they're trying to do here. And, if they go out there and they win games and they come out with two, maybe three losses, then they'll have a shot. And, I think that's important, but it all starts, this coming week with LSU, and it's really, frankly, a game that they need to win if they want to keep those hopes alive, Joey.
Sure. Dylan, I'm glad you mentioned the poll. I thought Sunday, which would have been yesterday, that's a day where you really think Vanderbilt kind of has a sense of normalcy in the situation that it's in at this point. Doesn't play yesterday, no huge win that it's actually coming off of a loss, and it's ranked 17th in the AP poll. It goes up 3 spots. And also, Dylan, for the first time in 51 or 52 SEC games, Vanderbilt is favored, and I mean, it's against the top 10 team. It's not against Kentucky. I mean, that's a big deal in itself. So I guess that was my takeaway from yesterday, and I think it's important to note that pretty quickly because you look at the past, and if Vanderbilt was ranked on a Sunday, it meant that it went on the road and beat South Carolina, or it meant that it beat number 1 Alabama, or at least had a few wins in a row. This Vanderbilt team, I think, has proven that it's a top 25 team until proven otherwise, and that's kind of my little State of the Union thought for now, Dylan. I don't know if you've got anything on that.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I think this is a team that, to your point, in the past, being ranked was a massive deal, and no matter what they did, they beat number one ranked Alabama. Like if they lost the following week, they'd be back out of the poll. And
Hmm.
this team again through the first 5 weeks has shown that they belong in those conversations to the point where, one loss isn't going to completely damage them. And if they lose to LSU this week, will they drop out of the poll? Maybe probably. Um,
Hmm.
but it's a good they've built the foundation they need for sustained success, at least for this season in the short term. And to your point, a couple teams lost. They actually rose or climbed 3 spots in the rankings, and they sit at number 17. So they're in a good spot. And then you bring up the fact that they're favored against LSU, and I think that's probably even more telling. And
Hmm.
again, first time in a long time that they've been favored in an SEC game, and it's against LSU. I mean, this is one of the probably top three historical, college football programs, and it's not like they're having a terrible year either. Um, so sure, Vanderbilt's at home, and maybe if they were on the road, they wouldn't be favored. But I think that's still really telling. And I actually checked just a few minutes ago, and the spread's actually moved. So Vanderbilt's now -2.5. So the odds
Mm.
are the line is moving towards Vanderbilt, which means the odds makers are expecting them to go out there and win this game, and that hasn't been something that Vanderbilt's had, and it's not necessarily going to change anything in terms of their mentality or how they play or how the game unfolds. I think Vanderbilt has shown on the other side time and time again that they don't really care about what the odds
Mhm.
makers think, but it's still pretty telling that, you know, they're favored in this game, Joey. And LSU, they're a good team, but they've definitely had their weaknesses, they've had their struggles, and there's gaps there that Vanderbilt can exploit. So again, it's a game that they're certainly capable of winning, and it's just a matter of going out there, rebounding from Alabama, and executing.
Sure. Dylan, I think Vanderbilt, to kind of to your point, would honestly rather be the underdog in a game like this. Reese Davis told us before college game day that everyone loves the underdog and that Vanderbilt has embraced that role as well as anyone. Hard to disagree with him at this point. I would think that honestly, there might be a sect of that team that's like, what the heck, we're actually favored. Like this, unfamiliar territory, again, I don't think really going to have an effect on the game. Dylan, this is going to be a big one, though, for Vanderbilt. I would expect a packed First Bank Stadium full of Vanderbilt fans. LSU's a far drive, and really our first time where we'll see kind of how vast the fan base is at this point of the season versus what it's been in the past, where these games have often seen this place overtaken. I know when Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase were here, First Bank Stadium was overtaken in a in a way as well. But expect this to be a little bit different. Expect it to feel like a real big game environment, and I think this Vanderbilt team has earned that. Time to see if it can go do it though. Like you mentioned, LSU certainly no scrubs this season, number 10 in the country, and we'll get into some of their weaknesses, Dylan. But I mean, this is a real team that Vanderbilt is facing at this point, and I don't think the spread should allow anyone to believe that this will be a game that Vanderbilt can easily win. I think it's going to have to be at its best, and LSU, like we said, certainly has some flaws. It's good enough to beat Vanderbilt by 15 or 20 if Vanderbilt doesn't come out ready to go, though, and certainly going to be an interesting week to kind of see where this team is at following LSU. Corday Sidner, or following Alabama. Corday Sidner said the jaws are set and nobody's pouting, but dealing with some real adversity this team is facing kind of for the first time and doesn't get easier on the other side of that bye.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the fans because I think this is going to be a pretty big game for the fans. And I was writing about this actually yesterday a little bit, because I think that the fans have done everything that they possibly could have so far. They sold out Charleston Southern, they sold out Georgia State, um, packed the stands for these non-conference opponents, and then you look at how they've traveled, and they've traveled to South Carolina, they've traveled to Alabama, and they're getting a presence that we've never seen really before with Vanderbilt. But to your point, this week is going to be really telling because it's the first SEC home game. LSU um, is a fan base that will travel pretty heavily here. So I think it whether it feels like a home game for LSU like it would in the past or not, of course it's not going to be all black and gold. That would be,
Hmm.
you know, naive to think that might happen. But to
Hmm.
see how much of the kind of the non-student section is packed with purple versus gold, I think is going to be very interesting. And I do think it has an impact on the game, Joey. And
Hmm.
I've written about this and I've talked about this, but I like when I was at, Bryant-Denny Stadium as a fan against Alabama, like you could tell that that crowd, and again, First Bank Stadium might never be like Bryant-Denny, but you could tell that Pavio and the team were impacted by the crowds, um, kind of, their
Hmm.
rowdiness and just the environment in general. While on the other side, Alabama was clearly energized by it. And, would Vanderbilt have won that game if it was at home? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. But
Hmm.
it did clearly have an impact. So I think it's a big test, obviously, for Vanderbilt players, but also for Vanderbilt fans to really kind of go out there against it. And it's a day game. It's going to be an early game. I think it's 11 a.m. Central, but
Hmm.
that big game feel will certainly be there, and it is a big test. And to your second point, LSU is a good football team. Their defense has been pretty strong so far this year. I mean, they've definitely you saw them against South Carolina. They looked pretty good against South Carolina. The defense, the offense, maybe not as much, but um, a lot of good things on that side of the ball for them. So it's going to be about Diego Pavia as it always is. He's didn't have his best game. Actually, maybe he had his worst game in a Vanderbilt uniform against Alabama 2 weeks ago. So that he's not. He probably hasn't slept much since then.
Mhm.
Thinking about it. So he's going to come out there looking to rebound, and he's given us and he's given fans absolutely no reason to think that he won't. But it's not going to be easy going up against that defense either, Joey.
For sure. Like you mentioned, LSU's defense really stout so far. 17 points or 10 points given up to South Carolina, 7 to Louisiana Tech, 10 to Florida, 10 to Southeastern Louisiana, 24 to Ole Miss and LSU's lone loss, and then 10 points against South Carolina. Dylan about as stout as it gets, probably the best defense Vanderbilt has seen to this point. Alabama's was pretty good, had a lot of playmakers that could force some turnovers. I think Alabama's probably the best team that Vanderbilt has faced to this point. I think LSU isn't all that far behind though, and we'll talk about their offense, but Vanderbilt's got to have a, I don't know, it's just got to be a little bit sharper offensively than maybe it's been throughout the last two games. I think the Georgia State performance was one that indicates to you that there is some explosiveness within the offense, and before that, we had seen it as well. But I don't know. I just think too many little mistakes against Alabama, and even against Utah State, I thought there were some times where the offense was a little slow, and I think you're going to expect that against LSU a little bit. You got to hit on a few explosives. Got to run the ball, run to win, like Harkley says. But Dylan, at some point, this LSU defense is going to create some havoc, and Vanderbilt's just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they're gonna need their playmakers to make plays. Also, we've been saying like, is this gonna be the Eli Stowers game? I think every game so far this season, and we've talked about
Mhm.
that and laughed about the fact that I think I've said that every single podcast. But
Yeah,
like, it is gonna happen. I think that one of these days he's gonna have his game, and they need it from him badly, and this would be a great time to get it because I don't think this is gonna be the type of shootout that we maybe expected at Alabama that didn't really end up becoming a shootout, but
hmm
this definitely shows this more the signs of a defensive game on the lower scoring side. I want to say the total was like 44 and a half, but that could be totally wrong. Um, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was when I looked, which is pretty low total. And they're gonna need their offense to, they shouldn't have to put up 40 points to win, but they
right.
are gonna need to go back to the offense that they looked like the first few weeks. You know, easily putting up 70 points and 60 points and, even 40 points against like Virginia Tech, South Carolina, those type of teams where they did go out there and score a lot. And they're gonna need that. And the defense is gonna have to capitalize on a weaker LSU offense. It's not very often that we say that LSU has a weak offense. I feel like they always have
Mhm.
one of the better offenses in the country, but it's definitely struggled so far this year, that unit. I think Garrett Nussmeier is a really good quarterback. He maybe hasn't played to the level he expects and fans have expected so far this year. I think it's hurt his draft stock a little bit so far. He was being talked about as, top five pick in the draft, and now maybe he's not as much. But it's a good chance for the Vanderbilt defense to show that, what they did against Alabama last week, which were a lot of really good steps, in the right direction, especially in the red zone, especially in third down. Like, that wasn't a fluke. And now, the Alabama offense is definitely better than the LSU offense has been. But they're going to need to go out there and make plays. I think LSU, they have a weaker offensive line, so they're going to need that pass rush. I wouldn't be surprised to see Steve Gregory really dial up those blitz packages, especially because the secondary, maybe the cornerbacks are banged up and they've been, maybe not playing to the level that you need to really stick in man coverage for a long time. It could mean a lot of zone blitzes, and then trying to get to Nussmeier quickly and not leaving your guys out there in coverage for a long time, Joey.
For sure. Dylan, I look at this game almost like I looked at the Alabama game in a lot of ways, where you just can't make the mistakes that Vanderbilt made in that game. It almost feels like a college football game of 20 years ago, where the final score is going to be something like 20 to 14. And I think if Vanderbilt wins the game, it's not going to be that. But if LSU wins, it's going to be a brick throwing contest where it's just all about the line of scrimmage and it's all about who makes less mistakes. Vanderbilt obviously made him against Alabama. I look at LSU though, as Brian Kelly said, LSU scored 3 points in 3 trips inside the 5 yard line. I mean, he called it catastrophic. LSU certainly has not lived up to the billing it's had offensively. Like you mentioned, Garrett Nussmeier goes into the year as one of the top quarterbacks on NFL draft boards. I still think he's got it in him. There's some speculation that he's a little banged up, kind of has been all year, but man, Dylan, I think it's just who can make less mistakes offensively because I don't know that either team is going to hit on all that many explosive plays. Vanderbilt almost has more capability to do it than LSU does, but I think LSU's defense really stout, as we mentioned. I think really effective against giving up explosive plays. Can't rely on that a whole lot, but man, it's going to be an uglier football game than Vanderbilt's played in the past, I think. And I still think there's a path to a win. It's kind of like we had mentioned, where you're going to have to win without having it be a sexy win down the line here. I think Saturday is going to be really the first time where that theory is going to be tested. Where if Vanderbilt's going to win this game, it's going to have to be because Nick Rinaldi and Miles Capers are getting in the backfield, putting pressure on Garrett Nussmeier. I would guess that Nick Rinaldi is going to rush the passer a little more on Saturday than he has. It feels like he hasn't been utilized that way a whole lot, and maybe hearing that that might change a little bit. Corday Sidner has to get in the backfield as well. It's almost just like we mentioned, a 20 years ago college football game where we talked about over the years the influx of explosive offenses and maybe defenses that are really stout going away. I don't know that Vanderbilt is all that stout compared to LSU's, but I don't know that LSU is going to score a whole lot either. If Vanderbilt wins, I think it's going to be more of a shootout than it would be if LSU wins. But in either case, feels like it won't be all that high scoring. Feels like it's going to be a real grinder of a game, Dylan.
Yeah, and with that, the other big news I think coming out of this week that we'll get tomorrow is what's the health status of a lot of Vanderbilt's defensive players because they have been running pretty thin out there, especially against Alabama in the secondary. The way Clark Lee spoke about Marlon Jones and Mark Davis made us think that it was short term, and he expects them back this week versus LSU, which will certainly have an impact. Being Martel Height really was exclusively a defensive player on against Alabama, which he kind of had to be because of the fact they were down Jones and Davis, and then Colby Taylor at some point in the game also went down. So getting
Mm-hmm.
those guys back will be big, especially for the type of game that we expect it to be, which is that gritty kind of tough game where they're going to need all their pieces fresh. And again, I think the cornerback room works best when they're shuffling those 5 or 6 guys. I think Marlon Jones has earned that. Mark Davis has earned that. Jordan Matthews has earned that. They've earned the right to play just as much, or more than they maybe a traditional backup would. And that's kind of how they've been deployed. So I would expect to see that. And then the other big question is Issa Utaha. I'm expecting maybe some kind of update from Clark Lee there. And I say take the original updates on Jones and Davis with a grain of salt because that was kind of the update we got on Utaha at the very beginning. Also, that it was
Mm-hmm.
short term and we expect him back next week. So you never really know what's going on, but.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily expecting Issa back this week. I think that would be, surprising, especially when Clark spoke a couple weeks ago. The direction it was going was more like towards surgery in long term.
Yeah.
Than it was like we'll see you back, but you never know. I mean, it's one of those things with the shoulder where um maybe the couple weeks off has allowed him to regain strength because again, it's not about really re-injuring it. It's a matter of does he have the strength to go out there and play? And if he does, obviously that would be a massive boost to a Vanderbilt defensive line that's played pretty well. Guys like Josh Singh have stepped up, and he had a really good game against Alabama. But
Mm-hmm.
they're missing, I think, that really big game-wrecking body in the middle of the defensive line. I think
Mm-hmm.
Glenn Seabrooks, again, we haven't said his name much. He hasn't done all that much as really the nose tackle. So they're definitely missing Wataha, but. Getting even the cornerbacks back, I think, would go a long way. And again, we should get some injury updates on that tomorrow, Joey.
Yeah, Issa Taha would be a big addition for the Vanderbilt defensive line, goes without saying in a lot of ways. I look at LSU, and I think that's a place where maybe Issa Taha can make a difference as well. LSU has really had some trouble protecting Garrett Nussmeier and allowing him to make plays downfield, stay healthy, things along those lines. you look at PFF, a 45 pass blocking grade against South Carolina in a game in which they won. Against Florida, another game which LSU won, a 51 pass blocking grade. Its highest have come against Louisiana Tech, Clemson, and Southeastern Louisiana. And then when the going has gotten tough, its offensive line has really struggled. Obviously, its biggest struggle coming last week. I look at LSU's run game, honestly been solid throughout the year, more solid than maybe I had thought. The yardage isn't great, but I think the efficiency good enough to maybe make you wonder if there's a breakout coming a little bit there. But doing a big week in a lot of ways for Vanderbilt's defensive line. I think really going to have the chance to wreck the game based off of LSU struggles to defend Nussmeier. That's where I look at and say if Vanderbilt can really change the game there and it doesn't turn it over a whole lot. And maybe it hits on an explosive or two. That's where you win this game. Again, though, it's going to have to look a little bit more like it did last year relative to what it's looked like throughout the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. It's got to be about winning in the margin. It's got to be about longer possessions, things along those lines. But Dylan, I think we're going to throw a little twist in here since we had the bye week podcast and things are going a little bit differently now that baseball is going a little bit. Basketball, the preseason poll coming out today as well. Vanderbilt ranked 11th. We'll hit on that first before we talk about Vanderbilt's trip to Utah in baseball. But Dylan, 11th, a little lower than I had thought. In my poll, I had them ninth. I actually know somebody on another beat who had them seventh. So I was expecting them to be a little higher. Ken Palm had them fourth. I think that's a little bit high. Byington kind of built the roster in a way that Ken Palm has an affinity for, I think. But 11th, I think you the league is interesting because there's a lot of teams kind of in that middle ground area: Mizzou, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. I don't know really what to make of any of them, or Oklahoma. I think Vanderbilt kind of clumped in there with them, but again, you're fighting perception here, kind of like the football program is. And we've got a full basketball show coming on Wednesday. But Dylan, just for now, your quick thoughts on Vanderbilt being 11th in the SEC preseason poll.
Yeah, definitely. We won't get too into it because we have that show coming Wednesday. But my initial thoughts is the rankings actually make sense, and not the fact that they're 11th, but I think when you think about the different rankings and you think about where they fell, it does make perfect sense because Ken Palm really ranked them high, and you've talked about this, Joey. But they're Byington went out there, got a bunch of efficient ball scorers, guys that can really make an impact on the margins, and that's kind of why they ranked so high in Ken Palm. The team doesn't really have a lot of gaping holes, maybe like it did last year. They got the size that they needed to get, and because of that, their efficiencies are projected to be really good, and that's why they're so high in Ken Palm. But then you think about why the media might rank them, and you're fighting their like you mentioned, the Vanderbilt perception, where I feel like if it's apples to apples, Vanderbilt versus Texas A&M, you're going to go naturally. Your biases will lead you to picking Texas A&M because of historical performance, and two. This team doesn't have, the Jason Edwards, AJ Hogard, like big flashy names that maybe are out there and really stand out as a superstar on the team or someone, that's really marketable. And if I'm a media member and I'm voting and I'm thinking about, well, who's out there that's actually going to lead this team, maybe you run into some question marks. So I understand completely why, they're 11th in the media poll and fourth in Ken Palm. And I think the true answer falls somewhere in between there in that, you know, 8 or 9 range, maybe even seven, like you said. But I think it's definitely the polls, if nothing else, if you knew nothing else about the team, the polls actually do tell a story about how Byington has kind of shaped this team and shaped this roster, and it's going to be a very kind of, I would say, the team has a lot of depth, so it's going to be about who stands out amongst those guys, and how much can they stand out. How can their bench unit outplay maybe other teams, bench units, guys that have like a star all the way at the top, Joey.
Yeah, for sure. Dylan, we'll get into it more on Wednesday, but I think I have an interesting view on this team. I think it's really high variance and like you said, a lot of variance in the polls. Hard to project though. Like
It is.
I think they're better on defense. I think they're deeper. I think they shoot it better. I also think there's going to be it was almost like last year where we thought there was going to be some instances where they go in and get their butt kicked by a team that maybe they should be competing with a little more, and then they go beat a team they shouldn't. I honestly think it might be more like that this year than even it was last year, just because they don't have a Jason Edwards or they don't have an AJ Hogard, and I think Frankie Collins is probably just a little bit better version of what they had in AJ Hogard last year. But I think they're going to shoot a lot of threes. I think they're going to play even faster than they did last year, and I don't think they're going to have to rely on one guy, nor are they going to be able to rely on one guy. I think that really creates the potential for a lot of different results in every game, and you could see them go to Alabama and lose by 30. You could also see them go to Alabama and win. I think those are the types of things that maybe are different about this year's roster relative to past ones, and I think makes it really hard to project for even an educated media member, which I would say this year in the SEC poll is pretty much all of them. It's just like picking names out of a hat at this
Yeah.
point, though. Dylan, we'll go to baseball. Not a whole lot we learned this weekend as they went to Utah. I think the starting lineups were interesting, and Mike Mancini obviously homered, but I'll kind of swing it to you. I know you've got some takes you want to get off about kind of what you observed and maybe heard throughout the weekend.
Yeah, so they split games at Utah is kind of all the information we got. There really wasn't a lot of information that came out about the game, which, people were asking me on Twitter, like, are you there? Like, what's going on? I was like, I got what you got. So um
Mhm.
hard to take away much from the games outside of, the lineup decisions, which is also, you really don't want to take away too much because there's a million things going on there, things they want to
Mhm.
test that really probably end up having no impact on the season. But to me, the main storyline is who's going to play where, and specifically who's going to play in center field, because this team really doesn't have a true center field on the roster that's not a true freshman. And I guess that guy would be Colin Brightwell, who I've actually heard some really good things about so far in terms of his glove and his speed. And I think if he can even hit a little bit, he has a really good chance of being your starting center fielder. And the other options there are Rustin Rigdon, who's played a good bit in center field. I think the fact that, again, you don't want to read too much into lineup decisions, but the fact that he didn't play there at all in a scrimmage where you're usually testing new things that you've been trying might be a sign that they're not necessarily comfortable with Rigdon there yet. Obviously, Braden Holcomb didn't play over the weekend. I think he's not necessarily hurt, but just working a little bit slowly in the fall, or maybe dealing with some minor things. But if Holcomb's been getting some work in center field as well as Rigdon, so those are two candidates to play there. But otherwise, it's really going to be Brightwell or someone else stepping up. And they tried Mike Mancini in the outfield a bit. I think a key storyline is they have a lot of infielders between Riker Wade and obviously Brody Johnson and Mancini and the younger Johnstone brother, as well as Max Jensen, who's going to play first base. And I think that's the other storyline is this team on the surface does have more power than they've had, and obviously that's been the problem that a lot of people have talked about. Certainly, the problem I've talked about is they haven't hit for power, and the truth is, this is a team that can hit for power more than they have between guys like Colin Bartsey and Braden Holcomb, who have shown that capabilities and now are a year older, a year stronger. Obviously, Brody Johnson has the power in him, and then you also go out there and you get Max Jensen from Cornell, who's been working back from an ACL injury. He'll probably play first base, and then Mac Whitcomb, who's set up to DH, and he's a big power bat too, as well as Mike Mancini, who obviously homered over the weekend. I wrote about this a little bit, but he put on some weight in the offseason. Like you can visibly see that. And he actually, we last year he was a lot more of like bottom of the order. Like you saw him bunt a lot, slap the ball the other way. Like that's not really Mike Mancini. He had this hamate bone injury at the beginning of last year, which is an injury that's like notorious for limiting your power like for
Mhm.
a long time when you get back, just because the way it works, it's hard to continually make that hard contact and lift the ball. But now that he's working back from that, he hit 15 or so, I think more than 15 maybe home runs at JMU 2 years ago. He's a
Mhm.
guy that can go out there and have some power as well, and I think he'll definitely play second base. My guess right now is Riker Waite will play shortstop with Brody at third, but Brody Johnson played a game at short over the weekend, and I do think they're comfortable with him there as well. So it's going to be about really who steps up there, Joey. But that's kind of my take on the current state of the positions, and obviously, they play home scrimmage versus Murray State on Friday. So maybe we'll find out some more there. We'll actually probably get to talk to Corbin, maybe ask him some questions related to that stuff. But that's, I think, kind of the state of fall ball right now. I would say definitely take everything with several grains of salt because so much can change between now and the spring, Joey. And I didn't even talk about the pitching, but maybe we could save that for a future time.
Yeah, for sure. I want to hit on Mike Mancini a little bit too before we get out of here. 15 homers at JMU, like you mentioned. You look at last year where all of his homer production essentially came at the end of the year. I think he hit
Yeah.
one in a early season midweek, and it was like a wall scraper.
Yeah.
Then hits the one
Yeah.
against one against Tennessee, and then kind of keeps the train rolling late in the season. I think that indicates to you that maybe he was a little healthier. I think there is more natural power there than he's been given credit for, and he's not the cleanup guy. I think Brody Johnson is really the power bat on this team. Holcomb's a better power bat too, but I think Mike Mancini is a better player than he showed last year in a lot of ways, and I think could be really a face of this team moving forward relative to kind of what he was last year, where people were questioning whether he should have been in the lineup or not. I think it's time to acknowledge a lot of that was health related and things along those lines, and I don't know that it's necessarily uh, all due to health, but he's just a different player, I think, than he showed, like you mentioned. And we'll talk more about that down the stretch. But LSU for now, Dylan, this is a big week for Vanderbilt football, one that I think is going to define a lot of the way this season goes. You have two losses, and you're all but out of playoff contention if you lose another one beyond that. So Vanderbilt with a big opportunity this weekend. We'll have a lot of other sports coverage this week, though. I'll be at SEC Media Day for basketball tomorrow. Dylan will be at the baseball scrimmage on Friday. Maybe we'll get some sort of video out of that as well. Graham and I will be basketball on Thursday against Virginia. We'll have a rapid reaction to that. Dylan, time to go. We got a lot to go this week, and Saturday will kind of be the end of things, but a lot to do before that, a lot to cover. Exciting week to kind of see what Vanderbilt has in basketball and baseball. We'll have a basketball pod up on Wednesday. But for now, I'm Joey Dwyer. He's Dylan Tovitz. We'll talk to you guys a lot this week. Thank you guys for watching. God bless. Peace.